What's up, people? I'm Shaggy, the Opinionated Hippie, continuing my deep dive into all live Frank Zappa. Going to cover every single Frank Zappa live show that's out there somewhere in the universe, in the internets, on the web, not on the web. I collected Zappa tapes hardcore back in the 90s and early 2000s, so I have almost all of them, I think. I still have blepharitis, which is why I'm wearing sunglasses inside, though it's getting much better. It still waters a little bit when it's in the light, but I think I'm a day or two away from not needing the glasses, which is awesome. And I now have the flu. Half of my class got it. I was there as they went home one and one to support them. And then I finally got it. So now I'm not there today because I have the flu also. So anyways, two shows, both from New York. We got 11/14/74 and 11/15/74. I want to talk about these two shows, or at least what we have of these two shows. And then I'm going to rank them among all the other 74 shows that I've done so far. From this, the third leg of the summer fall tour. This is the North American portion, the East Coast pretty much portion of the 74 tour. So the first tape we have is only about 30 minutes long, and it's just kind of a jumbled mess as far as like, I think there's only two songs that we have in their entirety, the Montana and the Don't Eat the Yellow Snow, and a Kid in His Arf. So a couple songs we have in their entirety, actually. But we got a lot of songs that are cut off, a lot of edits. The sound is great. Really good sound quality for what we have. Saxophone's buried a little bit, but that's okay. And we only have one guitar solo in here, and that's the Montana solo. The tape starts with the end of Village of the Sun. So we're getting the end of Village of the Sun. And then when that goes into A Kid in His Arf review, we get all of the A Kid in His Arf. That goes into Don't Eat the Yellow Snow. That goes into Don't You Ever Watch That Thing. Both the breaks are really cool. The little like Frank Zappa's guitar break and George Duke's keyboard solo break. The breaks are both really cool. Frank's is just really kind of weird. George's, he quotes Who Needs the Peace Corps, something he would do regularly during this part, especially in this part of the tour. So that's interesting. And then there's a really weird edit into the end of Camarillo Brillo. And if you're not paying close enough attention and you're just kind of like, la, 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 it's a really interesting segue. You're like, whoa, how'd we end up here? Almost wish it was something that actually happened in real time because it's kind of neat. But then there is this just really random cut into Camarillo Brillo. Let's see, yeah. Then that goes into Montana. The Montana is a great solo from the start. Frank comes in like with an idea. He's like focused from the beginning. It's not one of those Montana solos from this era where he's like fooling around for a while before something happens. There's a really nice part in the middle where he's kind of trading, maybe call and response with Duke for a while. He's doing something, Duke's responding. I don't know if Frank's actually listening to what Duke is doing, but Duke is definitely responding to what Frank is doing. It's just way too short of a solo, but what we have of this solo is pretty interesting. The solo does just kind of just seem to end at some point. And then that's the end of the set. So after they go back into the song, Frank eventually introduces the band, or like, reintroduces the band as they leave the stage for the encore. And then there's like a full minute of like jamming at the end after the band's been introduced. That's really interesting and actually pretty cool. And then they come back in the encore is Don't Eat the Yellow Snow. We get a lot of New York names. We get this references to meatball sandwiches, and Alsano Fonzo is like going to be making sandwiches for people and stuff like that. That's pretty funny. So pretty interesting stuff. But it's only about 30 minutes long. I'm not sure, how valuable it is. I do think the Montana is pretty interesting because the solo is pretty good, and that end jam is quite tasty. But for the most part, an interesting little thing, interesting little snippet of a full Frank show. And then the next show we have is the next one on the tour, which is 11/15/74. This is from Buffalo. Apparently there was a huge snowstorm. This gets referenced a lot over the course of the show. Lyrics get changed. They talk about the tundra a lot. Frank's even like during like More Trouble Every Day, he's like throwing snowballs in the heat and like, oh, that doesn't make any sense, but who cares? I mean, they're really playing up the whole fact that there's this huge storm outside. Frank is like, when the show ends, he's like, hey, it's going to take you a long time to get home, people, so be careful. And then there's a lot of jailbait jokes in here. So they change a lot of, that's the secret word of the night, would be jailbait. And we have a complete show. This is the complete show. And there's one tape cut, happens in Tamershi Deween, so we lose about a minute of Tamershi Deween while the taper flips his tape. But for the most part, this is another excellent sounding show. Fowler is super loud in the mix. In fact, Fowler is so loud in the mix on the 11/15/74 show that if you were to play somebody this tape and like they didn't know who this band was or they didn't know anything about them and they listened to this whole show, they would probably think that this was a band similar to like Primus or Rush or like a Jaco Pastorius band, where like the bass player was obviously maybe the lead of this because his presence is just so good and so tasty and so high up there. So opens up with a tush tush tush. There is a lot going on in this tush tush tush. Like everybody has jokes and they're coming at it, and it's super busy and super talkative and kind of exhilarating. We eventually get to the part where they mention the snowstorm. Frank thanks everybody for coming out in the storm. And then eventually we get to that point where Frank has to tune his guitar. And so everything stops while Frank tunes his guitar. Why is his guitar not tuned before he comes on stage? I don't understand that. But we do that thing where the band stops. Frank introduces the next song, which is Stinkfoot. We get a Tundra reference right in the beginning of this. Fowler is really nicely loud in the mix. From the Here Fido on part, it almost seems like once we get to the Here Fido part, we get to that real crazy part where they're like going crazy before he goes sick. Fowler is super loud. The solo is fantastic. It is dynamic. Has these nice melodic sections. It gets super scrappy at times. There's a couple like peaks when it seems like it's going to end, but then Frank keeps on going. Excellent Stinkfoot solo. I've always thought Stinkfoot was a great opener, as long as there wasn't a poodle lecture following it. And this sets a really good tone for this show. Then we get a Redunzel. The Redunzel solo is your typical 74 Redunzel solo. Frank comes out pretty focused and seems to be pretty committed to an idea, but then he has these like fragmented ideas, and then he kind of brings it down and toys around with like the percussion section a little while, and he's just kind of gets, kind of weird and loses sort of the thread of the solo, and then he builds it back up, and then it gets playful, and then it's just kind of all over the map, and doesn't really like to compare like 74 solos to compare to like 79 solos. 79 solos might be Frank's peak year. Like all the Shut Up and Play Your Guitar solos are from 79. Those are each of those solos just seems to have this like from point A to point Z, just this narrative thread. 74 solos are not, they go like this. Like they're all over the map, and it can be frustrating if you're looking for Frank to find a groove or stay in a pocket. He doesn't find a groove or stay in a pocket. Like he's all over the place. And this Redunzel solo is your typical I'm all over the place Redunzel solo. I have tea to help my throat with this flu thing, so I'm going to drink some really good. But it's an interesting solo, and it's a good solo, and it's why I like 74, because of just the sort of somewhat chaotic nature of the what direction is Frank going in now. Because it's Redunzel, we get a Village of the Sun with a kind of subpar Napoleon solo. I don't know. It's a good solo, but it just seems there are better Napoleon sax solos out there from the store. A great Echidna's Arf of You, where Fowler just sounds ridiculous. Don't You Ever Wash That Thing. Frank's solo in here, the first half of it is a full band start and stop, or the whole band's like, Frank's like, did it, and the whole band's going, and then they stop. And then Frank does some more licks and the band starts. So it's that really staccato start and stop first half. Frank's solo, Duke's solo is super funky. When Frank does the, ladies and gentlemen, watch Ruth. Ruth has been thinking. Ruth has been wondering if George will do it again. And then during George's solo, George says, do what? And then Frank says, what does Frank say? Oh, grab another booger bear. So that's what George apparently is going to do again. And then during the closing drum solo, and don't you ever watch that thing, George starts playing like some little licks in it, and then Nappy comes in, and it becomes this weird little psych jam at the end. So that's a nice little treat that's just kind of randomly thrown in, kind of playful, kind of noisy, but like kind of reminiscent of like earlier Don't You Ever Watch That things when there would be a more of a full-fledged jam at the end. This is definitely not a full-fledged jam, but we get some nice little noise action at the end. Before we go into Penguin in Bondage, Jailbait in Bondage is kind of what this becomes. There's a lot of jailbait references in here. The solo starts off really nicely. Frank has some ideas early on, and like he's slow, he's building it. Then he falls into this really nice groove for a while. Quickly abandons that, and then we get sort of another maybe just standard Penguin solo for this tour. I've said on every video, Penguin and Cosmic Debris have always delivered. This is probably your more just typical Penguin in Bondage solo, but it's still a nice, pretty meaty solo from Frank. Then we get a Tamershi. During the build-up into Tamershi, Frank just goes Kung Fu Fighting. All right, we got that. Tape cut comes into Tamershi Dweens. We get like a minute of that. Then we get the tape cut. We jump into the middle of Dog Meat, and then we get Building a Girl. A lot of effort is going into this Building a Girl. It's a really good Building the Girl. I think these are one of the more interesting things. This is just, if you're not familiar with what this song is Frank is conducting the band to do a bunch of noises, but it's a lot of these noises very much sound like something is being built. I think it's Ruth, whatever Ruth is doing on percussion has this very mechanical turning of knobs building thing vibe. But it's just this really 1.5, 2 minute little segment that Frank does at the end of the Uncle Meat. That's always cool. So yeah, there's that. And then that ends. And then before the next song, everybody's yelling requests at the audience. Frank goes, "Everybody talk at once. I can understand all of you. And I will say this," once again referring to the fact that I teach kindergarten, "I can handle 3 conversations at once. I've learned that if I have kids, 5-year-olds don't care if anybody else is talking. I have 3 different kids are talking to me. I can follow 3 conversations, and all you have to do is go like this, point a finger at them, and they'll be like, oh yeah, like you're listening to me. Once it gets above 3, then it just depends on which kids are talking and what they're saying as to whether I'm following them. But that's my own aside. Then we get a Don't Eat the Yellow Snow, the whole suite. During the Nanook, Frank is racing through these lyrics. Like he is going through them faster than I think I've ever heard him do Nanook lyrics ever. He is at full speed. It is crazy. And apparently, and I'm not going to take this advice, but they say that one of the ways you can fix an eye affliction is by picking up some jailbait, which I'm not going to do, but there is some medical advice here. Also, there is a complete random reference to the sandwich theme from the previous show about, hey, why don't you pick up a sandwich while you're there? So interesting that we get that. And then during Father Oblivion, Frank explains where Good Morning, Your Highness comes from. He explains the commercial, the margarine commercial. Good morning, Your Highness. So that, he explains that. We get a Camarillo Brillo, More Trouble Every Day for the encore. They play Camarillo Brillo. George does his solo at the end. Frank says, "We are now going to make a suave and somewhat dynamic transition to the next song." It's actually quite jarring to all of a sudden they go into the dun-dun-dun. They just jump right into the More Trouble Every Day. It feels weird not having that come out of Son of Orange County. It's a little bit jarring. And then we get a pretty nice aggressive solo. Some really nice bending of the notes there towards the middle part. It gets pretty tasty. Too short of a solo, but some good energy. This is a good show. Nothing absolutely phenomenal comes out of it. It's fun, I would say, more than anything. The guitar solos aren't too epic. I think maybe the best solo as far as compared to other solos from the tour might be the Stinkfoot solo, the first solo of the night. That's just got some really, really good energy. The Redunzel is fun, but it's just can't quite compare to some of the other ones from other parts of this tour. But yeah, good listens. Neither one of these listens are like bad listens. The sound is fantastic. It's just, it falls to the middle of a great tour. So it's still just great, but there are things that are better. Where would I rank them? If I had to rank them all the others I've done so far. So that's where I have them ranked right there. I have that Rochester one is way towards the bottom, only because it's just 30 minutes. And I do think everything else at least offers something that's pretty interesting, that's worth checking out, even if the sound is worse. I'm not going to reward shows for just having good sound quality, even if they're really short. And then the 11:15 one is all the way up at number 6. The sound quality is good. It's fun. There's nothing spectacular. But then, yeah, that's 6. It's hard to rank these things. This was a fool's errand. But yeah, that officially released Erie show is my favorite still. And those top 2, those top 3, I think are pretty. Yeah. All right, that's my ranking. I'm not going to comment on them. I have videos on them. I'm just rambling. All right, that's all I got. Thanks for watching. Next up, there is another show. We do have a really weird fragmented set list that's obviously wrong. It's like 6 songs from the 11:16 show. I've never seen a tape of it. I've seen the set list, but the set list is like, it's like all jumbled and out of order, like Don't Eat the Yellow Snow, then other songs, and then I think there's a Nanook at the end. So I don't even know if that set list is accurate or just somebody randomly put that out there. But the next show, the 11:17 show that I'm talking about next week, yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. All right, that's all I got. Subscribe, like, share, comment, do those things. Let me know your thoughts on these shows, and peace. Talk to you later.